My name is Daniel Foster, and for most of my life, I believed my mother disappeared because the world simply moved on without her. I didn't understand back then that some truths are not lost by accident. They are buried on purpose. My mother, Rebecca Foster, vanished in the fall of 1998 from a quiet town in northern Michigan. It was the kind of place where people waved at passing cars and trusted their neighbors enough to leave doors unlocked. Rebecca was 39 years old, a nurse at the county hospital, and the kind of woman who noticed when someone looked tired and asked about it. She raised me alone after my father died, and our life was simple but steady. She worked night shifts, cooked dinner whenever she could, and never failed to leave me a note if she wasn't home when I woke up. On October 3rd, she left our house just after 7 in the evening for what she said would be another long night shift. She kissed my forehead, told me to lock the door, and reminded me to finish my homework before bed. I was 13 years old and more annoyed about math than worried about anything else. The door closed behind her, and nothing about that moment felt important. It should have. That was the last time I ever saw my mother. When she didn't come home the next morning, I assumed she had picked up an extra shift. Nurses did that all the time. By noon, worry had settled into my chest like a weight. The hospital told us she never arrived. Her car wasn't in the employee lot. No one had seen her. By evening, panic took over. 2 days later, the police found her car parked neatly on a rural road near the woods, about 15 miles from our home. The doors were locked. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her wallet was inside. Nothing was stolen. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood. No broken glass. It looked as if she had simply parked and vanished into thin air. The police said they were treating it as a missing person case. Volunteers came from nearby towns to help search. Dogs followed scent trails that disappeared near the tree line. Helicopters circled overhead. For weeks, strangers knocked on our door offering prayers and casseroles. My face appeared on the local news, standing next to my aunt while reporters asked questions I couldn't answer. Then the searches slowed. Then they stopped. After 6 months, the police changed their tone. They suggested my mother may have left voluntarily. They talked about stress, about burnout, about how some people simply want to start over. I was 14 years old, sitting in a police station, listening to grown men explain that my mother chose to abandon her son without taking her paycheck, her clothes, or her car. I knew they were wrong. Rebecca Foster did not walk away from responsibility. She didn't disappear without calling. She didn't leave me. But belief doesn't count as evidence. After 2 years, the case went cold. Life didn't stop just because mine did. I grew older. I graduated high school. I went to college. I tried to build a life that looked normal from the outside. Inside, everything stayed frozen in that October morning. Every phone call after midnight made my heart race. Every unknown number felt like it could be her. Every few years, I contacted the police department asking if there were updates. There never were. Her case became a number in a filing cabinet. A folder no one opened. A story people told in the past tense. By the time I turned 30, most people assumed my mother was dead. Some assumed she didn't want to be found. I stopped correcting them. Explaining the truth over and over was exhausting. Even grief changes shape when it lasts long enough. Then, in the spring of 2023, my phone rang. The woman on the line introduced herself as Detective Karen Liu from the Cold Case Unit. Her voice was calm, professional, and careful, as if she knew one wrong word could break something. She asked if I was Rebecca Foster's son. No one had spoken my mother's name with purpose in decades. She told me they were reviewing old missing persons cases using modern forensic technology. I told her there was nothing to review. I told her the case had been cold for 25 years. There was a pause, and then she said something that made me sit down. We think there was a mistake. They had reopened my mother's file. The first thing they re-examined was her car. In 1998, forensic testing was limited. A few fibers had been collected and dismissed. A partial fingerprint was logged, but never matched. Back then, it wasn't enough to mean anything. Now it was. The fingerprint didn't belong to my mother. It belonged to a man named Thomas Avery. Thomas Avery was a name I remembered instantly. He was a volunteer firefighter in our town. He helped search for my mother. He stood beside me during the candlelight vigil. He hugged me and told me everything would be okay. He was someone everyone trusted. Someone who wore a uniform. Someone who knew how to look helpful. Thomas Avery moved out of state in 2002. He lived quietly.
He married.
He retired. He never once appeared on a suspect list. No one had ever questioned him. Until now. Detectives began digging deeper. They pulled old witness statements. A hospital security guard remembered a firefighter often visiting late at night. A co-worker recalled my mother mentioning a nice fireman who offered to walk her to her car after shifts. A gas station receipt placed Avery near the road where her car was found. Then they noticed something even darker. Between 1990 and 2005, 4 women had vanished along rural highways across 3 states. All worked night shifts. All disappeared without a struggle. All cases went cold. And every disappearance happened within driving distance of where Thomas Avery lived or volunteered. Cold cases don't look connected until someone finally connects them. When police brought Avery in for questioning, he denied everything. He said he loved helping people. He said he barely remembered my mother. He said he had dedicated his life to service. But his DNA told a different story. They found it on my mother's jacket. After nearly 25 years, Thomas Avery confessed. He said he offered my mother a ride when her car wouldn't start. He said she trusted him because he wore a uniform. He said things got out of control. He said it was an accident. It never is. He led police to a wooded area miles from town. There, buried beneath the ground, were my mother's remains. When they called to tell me, I didn't scream. I didn't speak. I sat on the floor and felt something inside me finally collapse. I had spent half my life wondering if she was alive somewhere, trapped, waiting for me to find her. The truth hurt, but it ended the waiting. For the first time in 25 years, I knew where my mother was. For a long time after they found my mother, I didn't feel relief the way people expect you to. Everyone said I should feel lighter, that knowing the truth would finally give me peace. What it really gave me was a strange silence inside my head. The questions that had followed me for 25 years were suddenly gone, and I didn't know who I was without them. The police kept calling with updates.
Forms to sign.
Statements to review. Dates to remember. They told me Thomas Avery had confessed not only to my mother's murder, but to others as well. Names I had never heard before. Women whose families had waited just as long as I had. Some longer. Some never lived to hear the truth. It felt unreal that one man had stolen so many lives while being praised for helping people. I learned details I wish I hadn't. How he chose women who worked night shifts. How he used his uniform to look safe. How he offered help and waited for trust. My mother had always taught me to believe in people who showed up when you needed them. That lesson twisted itself into something painful and confusing. The town reacted slowly when the news broke. At first, people didn't want to believe it. Thomas Avery was a volunteer firefighter, a church member, a man who grilled burgers at community events. It was easier for them to believe my mother had disappeared on her own than to accept that someone they trusted had been living a lie. I watched neighbors defend him online, calling the investigation a mistake, saying DNA could be wrong. Some of those same people had told me years earlier that it was time to move on. When the full confession became public, the town went quiet.
No protests. No apologies.
Just a slow, uncomfortable acceptance that something terrible had happened right under their noses. I went back to my childhood home for the first time in years. The house felt smaller. The walls still carried the echoes of my mother's voice, calling me to dinner, reminding me to do my homework. I stood in her old bedroom and opened the closet. Most of her clothes were gone now, donated over the years, but a few sweaters remained. I held one and realized I didn't remember how her hugs felt anymore. That hurt more than anything else. The funeral was small. Just family, a few friends, and some people I didn't recognize. Families from other states attended too, people whose loved ones had been connected to the same man. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. The look in their eyes told me everything. Waiting for answers changes you. It carves something permanent into your face. I spoke at my mother's grave. I told her I was sorry it took so long. I told her I had tried to live a good life. I told her I never believed she left me. When the service ended, I stayed behind until everyone else left. I didn't want to say goodbye again, but I knew this time was different. This time, I knew where she was. The legal process dragged on, even though Thomas Avery would never stand trial. Lawyers argued about records, about compensation, about responsibility. The state issued formal apologies to families.
Some accepted them.
Some didn't. An apology doesn't give you back birthdays or holidays or the sound of a loved one's voice. I visited Ethan Brooks in prison before he was released. He had spent decades behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. When I walked into the visiting room, he stood up slowly, like his body had forgotten how to move freely. He didn't blame me. He didn't blame my family. He blamed a system that wanted an answer more than it wanted the truth. I used to dream someone would finally listen, he told me. I stopped dreaming after a while. When he walked out of prison weeks later, cameras followed him. Reporters asked how it felt to be free. He said freedom felt strange after being gone for so long. I thought about how my mother never had the chance to walk free at all. Life didn't suddenly become easy after that. Closure isn't a switch you flip. It's something you grow into, slowly, painfully. Some days I felt angry at everyone. Other days I felt numb. Sometimes I felt guilty for living a life my mother never got to finish. I started speaking to other families with cold cases. People reached out after seeing the story online. Sons, daughters, sisters, brothers, all of them carrying the same quiet exhaustion I recognized in myself. I learned how common it was for cases to be set aside, not because they were impossible, but because they were inconvenient. Too much time, too few resources, too many questions. Technology did what people didn't. It waited patiently. Years earlier, the evidence wasn't enough. The samples were too small, the connections too loose. Now those same details spoke clearly. Time hadn't erased the truth. It had preserved it. I returned to Michigan one last time before selling the house. Standing on the same road where my mother's car had been found, I tried to imagine her final moments. I wondered if she was scared, or if she believed she was safe until the very end. I hoped she never realized how dangerous trust could be. I don't believe evil always looks threatening. Sometimes it looks helpful. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it stands beside you at a vigil and promises everything will be okay. People still ask me how I survived, not knowing for so long. The truth is, I didn't survive it. I lived with it. There's a difference. Survival suggests strength. Living with uncertainty is something else entirely. It's learning how to function with a piece of yourself missing. Cold cases matter because silence protects the wrong people. Because waiting doesn't mean forgetting. Because families deserve answers, even decades later. And because truth doesn't expire. My mother didn't disappear because no one could find her. She disappeared because no one looked hard enough, long enough, and in the right direction. The past is never really gone. It just waits. After my mother was laid to rest, I expected life to slowly return to something that resembled normal. People tell you grief has stages, that healing follows a pattern. That isn't true when your loss stretches across decades. The end of waiting didn't feel like closure. It felt like stepping into an unfamiliar silence where the noise had finally stopped, but the echo remained. I stayed in Michigan longer than I planned. I found myself driving the same roads my mother used to take to work, passing the hospital where she spent so many nights caring for strangers. I stood in the parking lot and imagined her walking toward her car after a long shift, tired but still thinking about what to cook for dinner the next day. Knowing what happened to her didn't erase those images. It sharpened them. The police continued contacting me as they worked through the other cases connected to Thomas Avery. Families from different states reached out. Some thanked me for answering questions. Some just wanted someone who understood what it was like to wait that long. We shared stories that sounded painfully similar. Last phone calls. Abandoned cars. Years of uncertainty followed by quiet resignation. The same phrases used by police departments. No evidence. No leads. Time passed. Technology didn't feel like a miracle to any of us. It felt like an apology that arrived too late. The media attention faded quickly. That surprised me. For a few weeks, my mother's story was everywhere. Headlines talked about justice delayed, about cold cases finally solved. Then another story replaced it. Another tragedy. Another distraction. The world moved on again, just like it had in 1998. I returned to my job, but concentration was difficult. Everything felt heavier now that the truth had weight. Before, hope had kept things light, even if it hurt. Now, certainty pressed down on me in a different way. I started therapy for the first time. Talking about my mother in the past tense still felt wrong, but saying her name out loud helped anchor her in reality instead of memory. One afternoon, I received a letter from the state. It was an official apology for mishandling the investigation. Carefully worded, legally cautious. It acknowledged failures without naming them. I read it once, then folded it and placed it in a drawer. An apology didn't bring my mother back, and it didn't give me my childhood. But I kept it anyway. Proof mattered. I visited Ethan Brooks one last time after he was released. He was living quietly, trying to rebuild a life that had been stolen from him. He told me he struggled with sleep, with crowds, with silence. Prison doesn't leave you when you walk out of it. He said he didn't hate the people who put in there anymore. Hate took too much energy. I understood that. Before I left, he said something that stayed with me. He said the worst part wasn't losing his freedom. It was knowing everyone stopped questioning the truth once he was convicted. That comforted them. I thought about how easily certainty replaces justice. I began speaking publicly about cold cases. Not as an expert, but as someone who lived inside one. I told audiences that unanswered questions don't disappear just because files are closed. They sit with families at dinner tables. They follow children into adulthood. They shape entire lives quietly. I talked about how many cases could be reopened if someone simply decided they were worth another look. Sometimes people asked me if I felt angry. The answer was complicated. Anger came and went. Some days it was sharp and overwhelming. Other days it was distant, replaced by sadness or exhaustion. Mostly, I felt something closer to responsibility. My mother's story didn't end with her being found. It continued in the lives of people who were still waiting. On the anniversary of her disappearance, I returned to the spot where her car had been found. The road looked ordinary. Trees lined the shoulder. Cars passed without slowing. I stood there and realized how easily something terrible can happen in a place that looks harmless. Evil doesn't announce itself.
It blends in.
It waits for trust. I thought about how many times Thomas Avery had stood beside grieving families, pretending to care. How many hands he shook. How many lies he told without hesitation. The scariest part wasn't what he did. It was how long he got away with it because he fit the role people wanted to believe in. I no longer ask why my mother was taken. That question has no answer that would ever make sense. Instead, I ask why it took so long to look again. Why evidence was ignored. Why assumptions became conclusions. Why convenience mattered more than doubt. Cold cases don't stay cold because they are impossible. They stay cold because they are uncomfortable. Because reopening them means admitting mistakes. Because it requires time, money, and humility. But when they are finally reopened, they remind us of something important. Truth doesn't care how much time has passed. My mother was not a mystery to be forgotten. She was a person who mattered. A nurse. A parent. A woman who trusted the wrong person at the wrong moment. She deserved more than silence. Now, when my phone rings late at night, my heart still jumps for a second. Old habits don't fade easily. But I no longer imagine it could be her. Instead, I imagine it could be someone else's case reopening. Someone else finally getting answers. I keep a photo of my mother on my desk. Not the one used on missing posters, but one taken years before she disappeared. She's smiling, unaware of what's coming, living an ordinary day. That's how I choose to remember her. Not as a case file, not as a victim, but as someone who existed fully and deserved to be found. Time didn't erase what happened to her. It didn't erase the truth. It only delayed it. And delay, no matter how long, is not the same as denial. Cold cases matter because they remind us that justice is not a moment. It's a process that should never stop just because it becomes inconvenient. They matter because families keep waiting long after everyone else has stopped listening. They matter because someone somewhere is counting on the truth to come back for them. The past doesn't disappear, that it waits. And sometimes, even after 30 years, it finally speaks.